we see in this Gospel how the Lord uses all the elements of oratory to get his message across. In the same discourse, he uses even the sense of humour when he refers to tithing various herbs. He gives their names, rue and cumin, and then neglecting the weightier matters of the law. And he goes further, talking about straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. The mind boggles. And then we have here this very direct, uncamouflaged attack at hypocrisy. In the same way, you appear to people from the outside like good, honest men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. It's not pleasant to be called a whitewashed tomb that looks handsome on the outside, but inside is full of dead men's bones and every kind of corruption. I doubt very much whether his audience was too pleased with the discourse. It's interesting that in so doing he gave a model to preachers. In Ireland, even the truth may no longer be proclaimed. One wonders whether this is just a social factor, because if one multiplies that not by one parish or two, but by a situation which is generalized over a whole land, the exceptions being places where a certain type of people can gather, knowing that they want to hear certain things and come there for that reason, then one sees there's a huge victory for a sinister force in such a way that the people over a long period may no longer be exposed to certain truths. And the truth to which they will be exposed will be that proclaimed by what is socially acceptable and what is pumped at them. Basically, a very low level of catechism. Some years ago, I had a talk about something that was on my heart with Monsignor Charles Brown, the nuncio. I went to see him because the echoes that were coming to me from all sides were that in Ireland there is practically no serious education of the faith going on. It's massive, and he was perfectly aware of it. There are several ways of re-approaching it. One would be to take it out of the hands of the schools and to put it directly in the hands of the parish, which is the situation in many European countries. The disadvantage of that, however, would be that the by now vestigial Catholic structure would then be eradicated, and you would no longer have a country exposed, at least at certain points of the children's lives, to the sacraments. It would be a step towards a neo-pagan society. But the problem is not going to go away. Add to that whereas only in the generation of yourself you would have had, now and again, powerful missions given by people who were dedicated to that, orders that were specialized in it, in which not only were all the elements of our faith attacked, each night being given a special theme, but also all the stops would have been pulled out, as you will probably remember, with regard to the way in which it was done. I saw a bit of it in Italy, because there's still some of it going on now and again. There are orders which still have an instinct to do it. For instance, we had our big feast on the 11th of May every year, the feast of St. Antimo, who had given his name to the monastery, and we would have a huge procession with very dramatic lights and bands from the village to the monastery. We would have prayer and praise and the rosary being said on the way down, complete with bands playing and all the rest of it, with interludes and hymns. But then the culmination of it all was a popular sermon, and it was in the old style. The Capuchins could still do it, and they would be swaying the church full of people who actually liked to hear it, because in Italy they do like a bit of drama and colour. So it doesn't matter what he said, as long as he said it with power, they were quite happy and went away content. But it was interesting to see, because it was the living past coming through still, and it does actually have not only an edification element, but also a certain entertainment value, because one remembers how in days of old there was no entertainment. And so something of that nature was going to draw people. We know actually that not that far away from our monastery, one of the great attractions had been one of the greatest preachers of all time, a local man, Bernardino of Siena. And he would draw so many that they'd have to be there 2 hours before to get a place. The men would be on one side and the women on the other of the great campo. And we know the kind of things that he would say because a local person was expert at taking shorthand in his own way, and it was enough to reconstruct the sermons. And it was both theologically accurate and extremely entertaining in the good sense. It wasn't at all boring. He had quaint expressions such as going to Casa Calda, the hothouse, he meant down below. So this is also our heritage to claim. We tend to think that by now it's only in born-again evangelical context that one finds something of that nature. Not at all. We have all the centuries of that on our side, and we need to reclaim it. When studying homiletics in Rome, as it happens, somebody else was in the same class, and you know, Father Michael Cahill, we had, as our professor, one who was an expert at it, a Dominican, and they are preachers by vocation, but one who had been brought up a Southern Baptist there in the Bible Belt, and he knew both sides of the equation, so he brought on the best that he'd acquired in his youth and transmitted it to us. And we learned a few important hints. It has to be understood, and it has to be in such a way that the people are captivated. Because no matter what one says, if they're not there with you, there's no point. And he had tips about how to do it in such a way that it would be remembered. The Lord, of course, gave the example. What's he doing? He's pulling out all the stops. He's using all the elements of oratory, and he's doing it in such a way that people actually will react. So it's useless to give a bland, red, dead bit of unvivified truth. Why? The majority are just solving their problems mentally. What has to happen afterwards? The real issue of life. If, on the other hand, each soul in the full church goes away with at least something for him or her, no matter what the age, then one has done something. And it doesn't have to be that long. One has to be aware of the concentration capacity of the average person. Having said that, length is not just a question of time, chronological time. One can be boring while only actually going on for a short time. One can be unboring when one actually goes on for 15 minutes. I remember in student days, I sometimes used to drift on a Saturday evening to hear the great preacher coming to Down. Even though I was a Catholic by then, I knew that if one went to what happened each Saturday evening, one would get something worth hearing. They would pay to have someone come from a long way to talk to the students. And wow, there were things said in a way I still remember. We had one evening on prayer. It was a Baptist, and he spoke for actually 2 hours, but it seemed like half an hour, because he wouldn't say a thing which wasn't interesting, and in a way which wasn't fascinating, interspersed with testimonies, which of course help. Again, the parable in a different form. It's worth mastering, because it's not enough to just go to the essential of our celebration, the Eucharist, I mean the Blessed Sacrament, the consecration and the reception of Holy Communion, and think that therefore one is going to the essential, forgetting that the 2 tables are to be prepared, and we need to be nourished on both. Unfortunately, our problem in Catholic society is that we only have, in practice, one form of worship on a Sunday, in practice, usually. Whereas before, we had also sometimes services which were not just masses, but they were also, e.g., the evening devotions. The classic form would have been, in many places, rosary, sermon and benediction, which meant that you had there something which was not leading to, as it were, something more important, in itself stood up on its 2 legs and was worthy of a visit to church just for that. The sermon needs to stand on its own legs, and we need to find again moments where the word is given its due attention. If not, we'll just be recycling until death the volume of knowledge that we already have, and never ever be seriously challenged.